Hello, everyone. Welcome in. Welcome, welcome. We'll give folks just a little bit more time to trickle in, and then we will get started. Alrighty, so we are going to get things started. Welcome to the Morris-Jumel Mansion's February virtual parlor chat on the life and legacy of Constance Baker Motley. So just a little bit about me before jumping in. I am Danielle Gata. I am the Public Programs and Visitor Services Manager at the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And this is our monthly virtual parlor chat. We have these each month with varying topics, different lecturers, and it's a wonderful way to have a little bit of history on your Wednesday evenings once a month. But in case you haven't heard of the Morris-Jumel Mansion before, or you're joining us as a friend from a different group that maybe passed around the information about this program, the Morris-Jumel Mansion was built in 1765. It is the oldest remaining house in Manhattan. It was built on the ancestral land of the Lenape people and likely built, ran, and funded using enslaved labor. It was used as Washington's headquarters in 1776 for about 5 weeks, and then later housed Eliza Jumel, former Vice President Aaron Burr, and Anne Northup, wife of Solomon Northup, who was the author of 12 Years a Slave. And then a little bit of our program housekeeping. On March 1st, we're very excited to have our Women's History Month kickoff. It's going to be a full day of activations. So for admission to the museum, the price of a ticket to the museum, you can come and see 4 different activations. We're going to have a live art experience with Andrea Arroyo, a mini concert with the Washington Heights Chamber Orchestra. Margaret Oppenheimer, who was the author of The Remarkable Rise of Eliza Jumel, is going to be giving a talk about Eliza and her life. And then we also will be having a reading of some poetry based on the mansion and its history by the author. Ruby G, who is the poet who wrote those. And then on March 8th, we have another Family and Community Day. We have those each and every month. They're free, no registration required. So check out our website for info on that. And then on March 19th, we bring it all back. We've got another virtual parlor chat, and that is going to be with Andrea Arroyo about her exhibition Faces and Facades, which is currently on display at the mansion. I know everybody is always asking about our paranormal investigations, so here are a few that we have coming up if you were interested in purchasing tickets to those. On February 22nd, we've got one, so just this Saturday. Oh my goodness, it's already the end of February. On March 8th, International Women's Day, we have one that is a special edition focusing on the women of the house. And boy, is the Morris-Jumel Mansion packed to the gills with women's history. On March 15th, we have just a regular investigation. And then on April 2nd, which is a Wednesday, we have Eliza's birthday investigation on the day of her birth. And so, like always, I just want to mention that this meeting is being recorded and it will be then uploaded to YouTube. And you can also go to our YouTube, which is linked on our website, morrisjumel.org, to check out all of our previous virtual parlor chats. And now, finally, the most important part of the evening, how to submit your questions, because this is a two-way conversation with our wonderful lecturer, Connie, who I'll introduce to you in a second. You can go ahead and use the Q&A feature on the Zoom webinar and submit those throughout the time that the lecture is going on. Anything that pops into your brain that you might want to hear from Connie, go ahead and pop that into the feature. I'll come back after the lecture and read off some of those questions. So that is how to do that. Don't be shy. Toss those in the Q&A, and we will start to get into things now. So I am going to introduce our wonderful guest lecturer, Connie Royster. So I'm going to go and read a little bit about her, and then I'll turn it over. So Constance Royster, a lawyer like her aunt, is a consultant and an advisor to nonprofits and individuals in education, arts, and culture. Ms. Royster was a law clerk to the Honorable Damon J. Keith, U.S. Sixth Circuit, an associate to Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison, an associate at Paul Weiss, Rifkind, Wharton, and Garrison, and she served as an assistant U.S. attorney in the SDNY. Shifting her professional focus, she was the first director of major gifts for WSHU National Public Radio in Connecticut, associate director of development at the Yale Environment School, and director of development at Yale Divinity School. Ms. Royster has chaired the board of Open Communities Alliance, OCA, a housing equality organization, is a trustee of the William Casper Graustein Memorial Fund, and serves on the board of Long Wharf Theater. Ms. Royster graduated from Rutgers Law School in Newark and from Yale College as one of the first women in Yale College. Born and raised in New Haven, she is the niece and namesake of Judge Constance Baker Motley. She's a fellow of Jonathan Edwards College at Yale and a recipient of the prestigious Yale Medal. And so now I will turn it over to Connie. I'm going to go dark on my screen so that way I can handle the PowerPoint, and Connie's going to take it away. Enjoy, folks.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. It is a pleasure to be here, especially good to be here during Black History Month to talk about my aunt, Constance Baker Motley, an unsung hero of the civil rights movement, and the first African-American woman to be appointed to the federal bench in the United States. So this event is timely in that it is about a year ago that the 47th stamp in the Black Heritage Collection of the United States Postal Service was issued honoring Judge Motley. And there'll be more on that in just a moment. I want to give just a little bit of background about Judge Motley because, you know, you have to hear things more than once for it to stick. And I've learned over the years that so many people just don't know much about her, and they should. So Judge Motley was born in New Haven, Connecticut. Her father, Willoughby Baker, arrived in New Haven in 1905, followed by her mother, Rachel Huggins, in 1906. And they were immigrants from the Caribbean island of Nevis, a teeny island in the British West Indies. My grandfather and grandmother were married in New Haven at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And Constance Baker was born in 1921. She was the 9th of 12 children, and 3 of those children did not survive infancy. My mother is the sister of Constance Baker Motley, and I am her namesake. Judge Motley and her siblings grew up in a very integrated, multicultural neighborhood with other West Indian families, Jewish, Irish, Italian, and Polish immigrant families, and they grew up just a few blocks from the Yale campus. You'll hear in the clip that her father, my grandfather, was a chef at the famous Skull and Bones secret society, and that her uncles and cousins and other male relatives were also employed at many of Yale's eating clubs and fraternities, including the Fence Club and the Quinnipiac Club, well into the 1970s, and they were there when I attended Yale. You'll also hear in the clip in just a moment that she did not have enough money to go to college or to law school, and she would not have been able to go but for her personal tenacity and the foresight and generosity of a gentleman by the name of Clarence Blakesley, who was a New Haven industrialist and philanthropist and a Yale alum. And you will hear a little bit more about that in the clip. And so between 1961 is, I'm going to give you a little bit of the legal history here. Um, Between 1961 and 1965, she argued 10 cases and won 9 of them in the United States Supreme Court. And the case that she lost was Swain v. Alabama, which held that the exclusion of blacks from a petit jury was not unconstitutional. It seems a little crazy to us now, but that was the law of the land for 21 years. It was eventually reversed in a case called Batson v. Kentucky. So she effectively won 10 for 10. And again, she had many, many firsts. The first is believed to be the first African American woman to argue before the United States Supreme Court. So she had many firsts, and we will talk about some of those firsts as we go through some of her extraordinary life and history. But I just want to note that right off the bat because it's worth noting also that some of the fights that she was involved in and the legal defense fund for which she worked for almost 20 years, some of those fights are coming back yet again. For example, voting rights. It's on the burner again. And so I want to ask that we go ahead and play the clip, and I'll come back and talk a little bit more about her life. Danielle?
One moment.
Mm-hmm.
Just give me 1 second. It doesn't seem to be
Doesn't want it to go?
for me. Yeah. Just give me 1 second. I'll pull it up.
Okay.
Zoom is everyone's best friend, folks. Oh boy. All right. So here we are.
I might mention while she's looking to make that connection, that this clip was made by the United States Postal Service for the unveiling of the stamp. And of all the videos, they always do a video for an unveiling of a new stamp. Of all the ones that I've seen, and I've looked at a lot of them, this is the most fulsome and the best that they have done. And it's not because they particularly wanted to, but I really pushed for them to do one that was complete and was full of the information and presented Judge Motley with the gravitas that she deserved. It's also, there you go, it's also the longest of any that they have produced. Um, so they usually do 2 minutes, maybe, and this one is actually longer. Yeah, have you got it?
Yep, we are ready to go.
Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Not quite working.
What was that?
Let's see. It wasn't quite coming through on my end, but try it. Go ahead again. There you go.
Constance Baker Motley. You may not know her, but you should. Constance Baker Motley is a giant in civil rights law. She was called the Civil Rights Queen in her time and was very well known, and yet Americans today know her far less than they should given her significance. She is one of those lawyers who made it possible for Americans to gather together, to attend schools together in the way that we're accustomed to today. There is not a woman civil rights lawyer today in this country that doesn't owe a great debt to Constance Baker Motley. She literally broke the mold. She did it all. It kills me that so many people in this country don't know who was the person who opened the doors to segregated Southern universities. It was this woman. She is inspiring. She was amazing. And I'm so glad that the Postal Service, through the stamp, will help generations of Americans come to know Constance Baker Motley.
My mother was one of 9 children. Her parents were immigrants from Nevis in the West Indies. They came through Ellis Island with lots of other immigrants from around the world, around 1907. And they settled in New Haven, Connecticut. And her father was the steward at the Skull and Bones Club at Yale, one of the secret societies.
She didn't have money to go to college, but she was very active in the community, and she gave a speech to a community center board about why a community center was not being used by the community, the Black community. And the philanthropist who built the center heard her and said to her, "Why aren't you in college?" And she very honestly said, "Because my parents cannot afford to send me to college." And she did tell him, "I want to be a lawyer." And he said, "I don't know about women being lawyers, but if that's what you want to be, I'll send you to college to be a lawyer, and I'll also send you to law school." And he did send her off to college. First, they went to Fisk University for 1 year, but when she crossed the Mason-Dixon line and had to leave her train car and be hustled to an all-Black train car was her first experience, and that was just beyond her comprehension. And living in a community where it was Negroes only and whites only was not something she could really put up with. So she only stayed at Fisk for a year, and then she transferred to NYU and finished quickly. She finished in 3 years, and then she went to Columbia Law School.
Well, my mother was a second-year law student at Columbia. She got a part-time job working at a little legal storefront known as the NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and working for a young lawyer there named Thurgood Marshall.
She worked as a lawyer alongside Thurgood Marshall to change our country, to change our society by working on cases like Brown versus Board of Education, the 1954 case, which is one of the great cases of constitutional law that made it unconstitutional to segregate students by race in public schools.
It was really an apartheid country prior to that, where separate but equal had been endorsed by the Supreme Court in 1897. said. And it wasn't until 1954 that was overturned. And then, even though segregation in schools was overturned, it had to be done, as the court said, with all deliberate speed. So cases had to be brought individually in every case in the South. And so she argued many important cases in that effort, the most important ones being, I would say, the case to admit James Meredith to the University of Mississippi, and then Charlene Hunter and Hamilton Holmes to the University of Georgia, and Harvey Gantt at Clemson College in South Carolina. Those are probably her most prominent cases. There were hundreds of cases over the year.
She also was a path-breaking politician in the state of New York, where she was a New York State senator and ultimately Manhattan Borough president, where she had tremendous power over the budget of the city of New York and helped shape and improve New York City in ways that present generations are still profiting from. And then finally, in 1966, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who of course was a friend of the civil rights movement, appointed Constance Baker Motley to the federal bench. She was the first Black woman to be appointed a federal judge.
I remember being at the federal courthouse where my mother was sworn in as the first woman judge in the Southern District of New York and the first Black woman federal judge in the whole country. And I remember a clip of my mother being asked by reporters how she was feeling about this new job. And she said with a straight face, "Oh, I'll have to work very hard to try to keep up with the men." And I think there are people who heard that and thought that she was serious when she said it. And obviously, she wasn't serious at all. She had argued 10 cases in the Supreme Court as a lawyer. She won 9 of them. The case that she lost, the court reversed itself on 20 years later, thus perfecting a record of really 10-0, which is not bad for Supreme Court advocates.
When it came to an assignment like Judge, to do a little bit of research on it, but remembering some incredible footage of her going down south, her bravely confronting racism and hatred and danger, it was like, I have to do her justice. I have to represent in my art something that at least express for myself how much I honor and appreciate what she's done for our country and for the world. It wasn't pressure. It was more like, play on a word, do her justice.
On behalf of the 640,000 women and men of the U.S. Postal Service, I am pleased to present the 47th stamp in the Black Heritage Series honoring civil rights pioneer Constance Baker Motley.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that really does encapsulate a lot of the story of her life as a civil rights lawyer and borough president and New York State senator. And it doesn't quite get to her 40 years on the bench. And in those 40 years, she heard many, many cases, as you can imagine. I think it's important to note that there's really no way to encapsulate the gravitas of her importance on the bench. I'll mention 3 cases that seem to come to the surface quite often in terms of her import as a judge on the bench. One is Sostra v. Rockefeller, which was a prisoner's rights case, and it is held up as a case that really set in motion restrictions on solitary confinement. She was way ahead in understanding the prisoners' rights issues, and not and how bad it is to have solitary confinement, excessive solitary confinement. Another that some of you who might be lawyers may remember, if you've been around for a while, it still has some repercussions, and that is Blank v. Sullivan and Cromwell. And in that case, a law firm tried to get her removed from a case which had alleged sexual discrimination in hiring on the grounds that she was a woman. And so, she refused to be to disqualify herself. And again, it was a groundbreaking case that is still referred to in often. The other is one that really is reverberating again more recently, and it was Ludke v. Kuhn. And Ludke v. Kuhn changed the course of sports reporting when she allowed women sports reporters in men's locker rooms. Lots of people remember the days of Bowie Kuhn and his insistence that women had no right to be in men's locker rooms. But Melissa Ludke fought that, and Judge Motley upheld the right of Melissa and other women to be in men's locker rooms in order to do their jobs. Melissa has just come out with her own memoir, finally, called Locker Room Talk. And it is an excellent read. I was honored to do a talk with her about the case and about Judge Motley's incredibly important role in her life and in making her decision in Ludke v. Kuhn this past summer. So Judge Motley's cases reverberate to this day. Judge Motley served as a judge until her death in 2005, as I said, for nearly 40 years. And she became the first Black woman to become chief judge of the Southern District of New York. That position is now held by one of her former law clerks, Laura Swain. And so, again, Judge Motley's influence, that one of her law clerks became a federal judge and is now the chief judge of the Southern District Court. I would like to talk a little bit about, how she's being remembered in different areas where she's lived and where she's worked. Thanks to the Chester, Connecticut Historical Society and the Chester Land Trust, Judge Motley's summer home, which is a private residence, but the property across the street, which she also owned, are both on the Connecticut Freedom Trail. And the Chester Land Trust, which has taken over the property across the street, has built an amazing, wonderful public hiking trail and public preserve that is called the Little Rock 9 Trail. And that, of course, is open to the public. It's a moderate to difficult hike, but it is quite beautiful. And it's the way that Chester, Connecticut has taken her legacy on and has done a great job of bringing her to the public's attention in that community. Sadly, New Haven has not done much, but we've done some wonderful museum exhibitions, and we have hopes of doing something more substantial and permanent in the near future. New York, in New York, the jury selection room in the United States federal courthouse is named for her and bears her portrait. And this, I think, is very significant. There had been talk about naming the courthouse itself for her, and she demurred. But she did agree to having the jury assembly room named for her. And that, of course, is a place where everyone who serves on a jury or is being called to serve on a jury gathers for all of the proceedings that surround jury participation. And they're entering a room that bears her name. And so, service on a jury is one of those very important civic duties. And they get to know who she is and was. So that's very significant. In September, this past September, the chief judge of the Appellate Division First Department, Diane Renwick, unveiled the Motley stained glass as part of the Dome Revival project. Now, that's the ceremonial courtroom in the First Department, gorgeous, and I'll show some photos in just a second. Judge Motley's name auspiciously replaces the panel that bore the name of Justice Roger Taney. Justice Taney wrote the decision in Dred Scott. So his name was removed and her name replaces his. Very auspicious and very important. I think I would like to have the photographs that I chose to be shown now one at a time. Thanks. This, as you see, is the unveiling of the stamp last January 31st. It was an incredible ceremony, a very important day in American history, and very important for the family. The stamp is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, and it is still in circulation. Some post offices have it, and it is available online at the United States Postal Service. Next. It's given me an opportunity to speak all over, from third grade, sixth grade. This is a picture of me speaking. I can only show one of the students. That student happens to be my niece. I can show the whole classroom for confidentiality reasons, but there must have been 40 kids participating. The teacher used as an example during Black History Month, making stamps. And the students used their imagination after having learned a little bit about who Judge Motley was, what it is to make a stamp. What is it? What's their imagination? Of course, they learned about civil rights queens. Some of the stamps had crowns. Some of them had, the scales of justice. And so it's an amazing opportunity to let students learn. It was a great opportunity to let students learn about Judge Motley and use their creativity as well. So next slide, please. And this is an opportunity for students that I did with the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. Again, an example of giving children an opportunity to learn about Judge Motley. We had little kids, and the big kids, the adults, were not in the photograph, but it was an intergenerational opportunity to speak about her and to let the kids show their creativity about making stamps. And, you know, it's also a civic lesson on stamps and how that whole process takes place. I've also talked to many civic groups, libraries, uh, schools, and even I spent 2 days at Rutgers Law School on Judge Motley. So this has been an incredible year of acknowledging her. Next slide, please. This is the two on either side is an example of the replaced stained glass in the ceremonial courtroom at the Appellate Division First Department on Madison Avenue. And in the center is the Constance Baker Motley Recreation Center in Manhattan, which was named a few years ago for her. It's on 54th Street, East 54th Street. It's a historic building which the city chose to name for her. Next slide. I am speaking to you literally from Mississippi. Yesterday, I spent the day at the University of Mississippi, walking in the footsteps of Judge Motley and James Meredith. I'm on a kind of civil rights journey on my way to participate in an event not related to James Meredith, but an event at Mississippi State University, which is where I landed today. That's in Starkville, Mississippi. But yesterday I was for 2 days in Oxford, Mississippi. These are photos of the statue which was installed about 10 years ago of James Meredith, who, of course, with Judge Motley's help, integrated the University of Mississippi in 1962. The photo on the left is the building where he did classes, where he had to register and did classes, and where the mob tried to prevent him from doing so. The statue is of him walking through the gates, the portal of opportunity and success. It's a very moving experience to have done that, I can tell you, because I know that Mississippi was a hard-fought fight for my aunt, and that Medgar Evers was killed. Made her feel that she could never go back to Mississippi, that Mississippi was a lost cause. And it wasn't until, I think it was the 40th anniversary of the James Meredith victory that she went back. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was many years, decades before she went back to Mississippi. This was a very moving trip, and I listened to guides leading tours around this statue, going from the building on the left photograph. Directly opposite is the library. And it was interesting that some tour guides spoke about Meredith and some didn't. And you may recall that just a few years ago, this statue was damaged. So we still are in troubled times. And I think what my aunt would say is we still have to fight. She spent a lot of time, her whole life fighting for equal justice. And so I leave you with these images. And I thank you for listening.
All righty. Well, thank you so much, Connie. That was wonderful. But not over yet. So we are going to open up the Q&A. I see we've already got some questions. And continue to throw those questions into the Q&A feature. And let's start off. So one of our questions, the first one that came in was, did Judge Motley reside at 555 Edgecombe Avenue?
Oh,
If she did, during what years? Who were some of her other notable residents at the time?
is 555 Edgecombe Riverton?
That I'm not sure of. It's the Paul Robeson building now.
If it's Riverton, she did live in Riverton, that's for sure. And no, it's not Riverton. Okay. I don't know the answer to that.
That is a-okay.
So we have some investigation to do.
Hey,
Okay.
I love a good comb through the census
Yeah.
record. So
Yes. Great, great, great.
So yes, so it is the building that's across from MJM, which would even strengthen our ties with Judge Motley. But I guess we'll just have to reconvene, Connie, and
Yes.
do some digging.
That would be great.
So the next question that we have is, how much racism and sexism did she experience in her career, and how did she manage through it? Did she share any particular anecdotes on those experiences? And I think I second that question, and would even love to hear maybe some advice that she shared with you as one of the first women to graduate from Yale. If you want to share some of that with us.
That's a great question and a great big question. So I think let's start with her career as a lawyer in the South. Let's first of all imagine that she was a Black woman litigating in the South, and on her own, she was, of course, scared. And the racism in the South was palpable. She was in courtrooms where the defense, the opponents refused to call her, acknowledge her practically, and certainly refused to call her Mrs. Motley. She was, the most they would do would say, the lawyer from New York. They were just disrespectful and rude, and sometimes even the judges. So she had to just keep on keeping on. And she would say that sometimes when she was in court, that the community, particularly the Black community, the word spread, and they'd never seen anything like the Black lady lawyer from New York is in town, and the community would come to see that there was this Black lady lawyer from New York who was well known. I mean, her reputation preceded her, and they wanted to come and see her in action. So in a way, there was this kind of support from the Black community, but the white community and the white professionals were just horrible to her. They would write horrible notes and letters calling her names, vicious names. She could not stay in hotels. She couldn't eat in restaurants, as the same thing as she experienced when she went for the first time trying to go to college, that everything was black only, white. I mean, it wasn't called black. It was, Negro only, white only. And so she had to stay with members of the NAACP in their homes. They housed her, they fed her, and they protected her. So she often stayed in homes where there were armed guards protecting her. And, it's not so much that uh, that's the way she wanted it to be, of course, but it was the way it was. And as she talked about when Medgar Evers was murdered at his home, she had stayed with him, and she had noticed that area could have been a area which was hidden, that something could have happened, and that her son had visited there. So it was the kind of things which made her say that she would never go back. So yes, she was the racism was, as I said, really palpable in the South, but she didn't stop. She kept going down because there was, as she said to Charlene Hunter Galt, who said to her, I would like to, have some fun. And Judge Motley said, there's no such thing as fun right now. We have a job to do. Our job is to get you into the University of Georgia. And that's the way she saw it. As for sexism, I think as those of us who are, both women and Black, we know there's a double edge here. And so, yes, I mean, she would not speak of that as being directly. It was a given that we just have to do the best that we can, and just be our best. And education was always the primary goal in our family, just to be the best. So yeah.
That was wonderful. Thank you for that. I know we have some hands up. And so I'm going to call your name and allow you to talk. And so first up, we're gonna do Jim Kerr. I'm gonna turn on your microphone right now. So go ahead and ask that question.
Was that Jim Kerr?
Yes, he said that he had something to share.
Thanks much. And thank you very much for this wonderful chat, Connie. And one of the things that we're trying to track down is Judge Motley's residence at 555 Edgecombe, which is right across the street from Morris-Jumel. That makes her one of the truly well-known and well-regarded and famous neighbors of Morris-Jumel. And something that I learned only as we've been trying to track this down is that Thurgood Marshall also lived in 555 Edgecombe. And that is now a project that we're going to try to nail this down and perhaps name the street adjacent, one of the streets adjacent to 555 Edgecombe for your aunt. I'm a lawyer. I never had occasion to appear before Judge Motley, but her record before the Supreme Court speaks for itself. But thank you very much.
You're welcome. I hope you have success in tracking down, getting a street named for her. That would be great. Um,
Huh.
mhm.
We have Josephine Monaco. I'm going to allow you to go ahead and ask your question as well, since you've had your hand up for a bit.
Josephine, unmute yourself. Yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to have my hand raised, but so I don't actually have a question, but I have to just tell you, Ms. Royster, that this has been one of the most delightful talks. And I do a lot of the parlor chats for the museum because my daughter lives around the corner and we go there. This has been one of the most delightful and informative and heartwarming. And I am just thrilled to have learned so much about such a wonderful woman that we should have known a lot more about. So thank you so much for this presentation. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, and you are so welcome. Thank you. Hmm.
Alrighty, so it's very kind of her to say. And we have another question that I'll read out. New York was not and is not free of racism and sexism. What was her experience, particularly in New York City? What was her experience once she was on the bench with fellow judges?
That's a great
Great.
question also. So let's just say, it's not so different right now where there's pushback about when judges go on the bench, whether judges who have been in, legal aid, um, have the wherewithal to be judges on the federal bench, right? Well, she had some of that too, because she came from the civil rights movement. And there were those who thought she would not be qualified or up to it, up to the task, right? So the real issue is not whether she would be up to the task because she was because she came from the civil rights movement. That really is not it, right? The real issue was she was a Black woman. And so, and she didn't come from the white shoe firms. So, what she, but she was a hard worker, and she was as hard a worker as any other judge on the bench. And so I think that she did everything she needed to do to assuage any concerns that anybody had, not because she was trying to prove a point, but because that's who she was. But was it there? Was it underlying? Were these other lawyers and judges in the bar thinking that she wasn't up to it? Of course. Was she up to it? Of course she was. So, that's the kind of stuff that she passed on to me and to others in a very subtle way, in an experiential way. She didn't have to say anything. She just did it by example. And that's how I've, learned many of my lessons, that you don't have to say it out loud. You just do your thing. You do the best that you are able to do. You work hard and you break the barriers that have to be broken. The other question about, by the time when she was borough president and when she was a state senator, she carried so much power. She was, as borough president, she may well have been the most senior, most significant political figure, woman political figure in the country at that point. And so, and that was a election. So, you know, you can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want. She was the borough president of Manhattan. And, you know, so, and there will always be some, you know, backbiting and all of that. But you know, she just didn't let it bother her. She just kept going. I want to
That's
just
wonderful.
mention, yeah, I want to mention that Judge Motley wrote an autobiography. Um, and it is not in print anymore, but it's still available. You can find it on eBay and I think on Amazon sometimes. And it's called Equal Justice Under Law, Equal Justice Under Law. And that's her autobiography, which she, you know, she wrote, published in, I think, 1995. And it's well worth hearing it from her own, you know, lips, as it were. And of course, there's a biography. The most recent biography is called Civil Rights Queen. And you heard Tamika Brown-Nagin on the clip. She's a Harvard professor who wrote that biography, and it came out in 2022. So it's the most recent work about Judge Motley. Mm-hmm.
Alrighty, so I think we have time for just about maybe 2 more questions. So we've got one in the chat, and then if anybody has a buzzer beater that they'd like to pop
Mhm.
in there for Connie before we head out. This one says, we have seen photos of Judge Motley with Martin Luther King Jr. What was her connection with him, and did she work on specific projects or events with him in the civil rights movement?
Yes, okay. So, yes, she knew Martin Luther King, and she actually represented him in several instances. I mean, the civil rights movement figures mostly all knew each other. And so, yes, you've seen pictures of her with him. Um, you know, she was on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. She represented him in Atlanta. She got him out of jail. You know, if he was in trouble wherever she was litigating other kinds of cases and he needed help, she would show up. So yes, she knew him. Um, she knew his wife. Um, and she you know, she represented him. So yes. Was that the question?
Yes, that was wonderful. That I
Okay.
think that's an even closer relationship than many probably even
Yeah.
realize, to
Yeah.
be able
Yes.
to just call her up and say, hey, I need some help right now. I'm in a bit of a pickle, to say the
Yeah.
least.
Yeah.
That's a very close and very impactful
Yeah.
relationship. That's very interesting. And we have time for just one more before we have to say goodnight. Anybody has anything, go ahead and put that in the chat, and I'll just use this time to thank you, Connie, for coming and sharing your aunt's story all the way from Mississippi this time around. It was so wonderful to hear all about her and her life, and her legacy. And I think this Q&A has been so fruitful and wonderful, and also so wonderful to hear about all the things that you've been doing to promote her legacy and to follow in her footsteps on that civil rights trail that you're kind of going on now, which is so interesting. So yeah. Last question, if anyone has one last call. Don't want to close
And
it
if
out without.
not, it's been a pleasure. Great questions, and really enjoyed speaking to this group. Thank you.
Alrighty, so we will call it a night tonight, folks. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again, Connie. Stay tuned if you're interested in more programs like this. And thank you so much for coming. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.